Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop Podcast. Today it's my pleasure to have Alex Kerr, CEO and co-founder of Trajektory. Trajektory is disrupting the sponsorship analytics space by providing a great solution. We're going to talk about how it makes sense for brands, agencies, and teams. And we're going to walk through Alex's entrepreneurial journey and give some insights on starting a company and raising capital. Let's talk to Alex. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, Alex Kerr, CEO of Trajektory. Thank you for joining me today on the DLC Drop Podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here, and thank you for the invite today. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. It has been about 4 weeks since we saw each other in person.
Nice.
At the Esports Trade Association conference, we were introduced by the lovely founder of ESTA, Miss Megan Van Petten.
Lovely.
And you not only served as a moderator for our research and trends panel, but also sponsor of the jersey. So
yeah, we had a very
cool
jersey patch. We were excited to break into that part of the world. So yeah, we were pumped about it.
Exactly. So I really want to have you on the show because I love what you guys are doing at Trajektory.
Thanks.
Why don't you give a little bit of a background about what is Trajektory, and then we'll dive in a little deeper.
Yeah, Trajektory is what I think is a really cool data and analytics technology company based here in Chicago. But really what we are all about is helping the world's biggest brands evaluate their full sponsorship impact. And so when I'm talking about brands, I'm talking about professional teams and properties. We're talking about agencies. We're talking about the tens of thousands of brands that invest in sponsorship every year. But effectively what we're trying to do is say, hey, it's not just about social, it's not just about television. It's certainly those two things by and large, but it's also everything else, all the in-stadium assets, secondary digital with email and web. But how do we bring all that data together and evaluate it in a single platform? So yeah, we're excited about what we've built and what we're bringing to the industry.
Yeah, and what I think is really unique about you guys, there's a number of these companies out there, and so people listening might say, wait a minute, I think I've heard of these. I might be working with one of them, right? Or what we're seeing often is they're working with a few, right? And so take me through, why is Trajektory different, and what was the experience that enabled you to identify the problem that you're providing a solution for?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, but I think maybe a bit of an origin story. So I originally cut my teeth within the industry at an organization called Monumental Sports and Entertainment. So NHL, NBA, WNBA, esports, AFL, you name it. And I had the really good fortune there to help build that initial business intelligence team. One of the many things that fell under my purview was all the data analytics as well as storytelling around sponsorship data. And as you mentioned a moment ago, there are a number of vendors in the space, some that help with primary research, sending out surveys and secondary research. There are organizations out there that help evaluate social as well as television impact that's certainly out there. But what we found, especially at MSC, was that it was really only telling part of the story, right? We were telling a story about social, we were telling a story about television, and while those things were disconnected in the methodologies, there was so much else that was on the table that we just weren't reporting on. So LEDs, static signage, email, web, mobile, premium areas, like the list goes on and on and on. And it was just a really convoluted process where we were only ever really reporting on 10%, 15% maybe of the overall picture. And so this was a really frustrating experience to go back to, the hundreds of different partners that we worked with, your Geicos of the world, and saying, hey, thanks for spending $1 million with us. We got you 35 grand worth of social. We got you 100 grand worth of television.
Right.
Trust us, it's worth a lot more. Please spend more money with us next year. And so that was always something that was a bit of a head scratcher for us as an organization, and not just us, but really throughout all of sports. And I eventually left. I've worked on the agency side, I've worked on the brand side, and it doesn't get any better. So people are generally operating within a black box. And so after a number of years, I got with some other like-minded people, and we said, to heck with this. There's got to be a better way to do this. It's not just about one or two assets. It's about a holistic picture. And we said, to heck with it. We're going to go build our own company. And so early 2020, we set out to really try to revolutionize how data reporting and storytelling should actually function within the sports industry. And so I think we're a little bit different, especially because one, we do the holistic measure. We automate the process that takes 1,200 hours a year. We really bring it down into something that only takes a couple of moments to set up your reporting for the entire season. We have a consistent methodology. We do all the logo detection. We're helping groups retire 100,000 plus of legacy vendor spend that they no longer need. But
Wow.
really, I think our yeah, that is a big one, and we're winning a lot of hearts on that. But I think the big piece for us is just we were a organization and a technology company built by people that have actually experienced these challenges firsthand, where a lot of the other vendors in the space were a technology company first that then tried to figure out how do they then fit into the sports industry. So I think we have a really unique perspective in terms of how to solve this.
The DLC Drop podcast is sponsored by Ice Shaker. I've been a huge fan of this brand for the past few years, ever since I met founder Chris Gronkowski. What I love about this product is the brand story, the functionality, and the customization. Ice Shaker is a Shark Tank company invested in by Mark Cuban and Alex Rodriguez, owned by NFL players Rob Gronkowski and Chris Gronkowski. I love using my ice shaker anytime I'm driving to the podcast studio, I'm going skateboarding, or I'm at the gym. No matter what I'm doing, it just does a great job of keeping my drinks hot or cold. The customization for ice shaker is something that's super unique. You can get any name, just about any logo engraved onto your ice shaker and delivered to you within just 3 to 5 business days. Get your own DLC Drop branded ice shaker at iceshaker.com/DLC Drop. Save 20% on all ice shaker products with the discount code DLC Drop. Yeah, I thank you for walking through all of that. And I think a lot of why I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing is I've been on the other side. I've experienced this. When I was at the marketing arm, I learned that the love language of the agency is the recap video, the sizzle video that gives you all of your stats, right?
Sizzle reel.
Because you got to remind your clients all the time, hey, this is what we did for you, this is the value we provided, and this is why you should continue paying us and increase that spend next time, right? When I was at GameStop, really had my eyes open there, where then the marketing arm was my client, or I was their client actually, but I would get pitched all the time. I would get pitched these decks of, hey, John, $500K for this partnership or whatever the amount was. Send it to my buddy Roger, who you've gotten to know, and he would send back to me. He said, John, actually, not only is it not worth 500, but it's worth 2, and this is worth this much. This is worth this much. This is worth this much. And it was so eye-opening. Number one, it gave me a ton of leverage in negotiations, because I was able to come back and just have the confidence. Some people without a lot of experience in sponsorship think, hey, a sponsorship is worth what you're willing to pay for it.
Yep.
And it's like, well, maybe in some ways, but there's more science than art to this than people realize a lot of times. And there are actual valuations. And those are valuations that you have to return that value on as a partner. I'll give you one more example. When I was at GameStop, that really helped me understand what you're doing and the value of it is I was working to get an influencer program going at GameStop. And the response from leadership was, John, we can't spend any money there because we're not getting any reporting back. It's very rare that, especially an independent content creator, that they are reporting back a whole lot to the brands. And that was so eye-opening to me that brands have so much money, so many dollars compared to individuals, but if they don't know what those dollars are doing, whether it's successful or whether it's not successful, you can't measure, optimize, and scale, because it's like, oh, this worked, but I don't know why, or this didn't work and I don't know why. And I've been to conferences and I see these brands, especially big non-endemic brands, who have experience in other industries, and they're saying, especially in esports, man, I don't know what my dollars are doing. It's a black hole. How can I justify a spend in this space?
Well, yeah, and I mean, you hit on a number of things, and like you know me well enough at this point where like my brain's now firing and I want to go like 12 different directions. So it's like on you to like rein me in today.
I'll do my
But
best.
yeah, good luck. But especially in the wake of COVID, right? there has never been more scrutiny over the information or more of the data, right? And so like organizations,
Yes.
brands, agencies for years have kept saying, oh, like we want to be more data driven and we want to get better at actually reporting on sponsorship data and value. And like while some take that to heart, a lot of it is just lip service. But now that you've actually had a global pandemic now forcing the hands of these organizations to really look at their pocketbooks, and they're saying, hey, like what do you mean we're spending $80 million on sports sponsorship? What are we getting back for that? So now you have brands all of a sudden that are turning around, and now, where they weren't scrutinizing over $1 million or $2 million spent in the past, they're now asking for data and information. And it's not necessarily to say they're going to scrap the sponsorship, but this whole age of it just works is really starting to fall away. And, at least our thesis on this, it's going to be the organizations, the agencies, and the brands that have the data at their disposal that are going to be the ones that are going to be the most successful. I know that we've talked a lot about that in esports, but especially in a world today where like you are able to value these things and just nobody has spent the time to really figure out how. Like, I think that's going to be the next big thing. But actually, a question back for you to turn
Sure.
this on its head. How fun was it when you had that information from Roger to be able to go back and into the room and say, hey, no way, this isn't worth 500. This is only worth 200. What was the response, right? Like, did you get a good response, or was it just kind of you caught them with their pants down and they didn't know how to respond to that?
Yeah, it's case by case depending, but obviously the bigger misses are typically because they don't know how much it's worth themselves, right? So I would argue that or maybe it's more important for the person doing the pitching to know how much these deals are actually worth, for even more so than the person receiving the pitch. Because I can tell you, I've pitched a million people over the course of my career, and one of the big questions is how much should I charge, right? Like, how much should I charge for these services? And I remember at the beginning of my career, worked with a company, we worked with very small companies, and then we'd work with really big companies like Nike. And the initial thought was like, whoa, Nike's got a bunch of money. I bet we could charge more. Well,
Yep.
guess what? Successful companies don't become successful by paying too much for things,
Sure.
right? And they also have resources, like I had at GameStop, to be able to actually tell you what these things are worth. So yeah, it was really case by case to answer your question, and a bit of a scramble to say, oh my goodness, well, now I've got to like really justify all these things, because I talk to people all the time about figuring out budgets with scope and things like that. Anytime you have a budget and it's requested to be brought down, you should adjust your scope as well, right? Because if I pitch you and I'm like, hey Alex, it's gonna be 30 grand for my services, and you're like, I got 20. I'm like, cool, we'll do the same. You're like, wait a minute, so you were just screwing
Right.
me. You're admitted that you know you're bluffing me here, and now I don't trust you, and I also no longer value what you were pitching. I had a naming rights deal actually that was pitched to me, and no names will be named here on the podcast. The shade will be anonymous, but somebody pitched me this pretty high, ridiculously priced naming rights deal. And when I responded to the guy, it was so high, I just said, hey, it's going to be a no from us. And he said, John, frankly, I'm a little surprised here. You're not even countering. And I said, so and so. It is so far off from what this is
Right.
actually worth. I can't counter. Countering down to a reasonable cost, there would be nothing left on the table if you were to reduce that scope. And so, yeah, it is a major benefit on both sides of the coin of like, hey, first of all, make sure that you know that you're valuing things right. 'Cause never everybody has those capabilities. Like, not everybody knows this is how much this thing should cost. But you run across the person who does, and a lot of questions come up, both long term as well as short term.
But so dead on. But there are also brands out there, and actually more so properties, right? not to be named at the moment.
Of course.
Which, yeah, we'll see. Something's going to slip at
The
some point.
anonymous
Edits.
podcast. That's
That's the
the
beautiful thing of editing, right?
right.
But there are brands out there that are overinflated in terms of their value. And does that mean that they shouldn't be selling something for 150 grand if it's really only worth 50,000? Absolutely not, right? Like
In
if you
the
can get
open
150
market,
grand
yeah.
for it,
What
you should
someone's
get it.
willing to pay for it is how much it costs, right?
Exactly right. And so, that's always kind of an interesting area too, is because like you will come across, certain leagues or certain brands or properties where they realize that they are a front and center organization. And while it might only cost, making up the numbers, 100 grand, and that's really what it's worth, if they can charge 250 for it because they know that they're this really premier sports organization,
Sure.
all the power to them. But what's interesting though is that things always seem to have a way of coming around, right? The good times only last for a certain number of years, or if you're a dynasty, maybe a little bit longer. But ultimately, it's also how do you effectively have the data story, and how do you tell that story effectively so that when the times aren't as good, that you still have something that's compelling to be able to
Oh,
offer your partners as well. So it's
absolutely.
interesting how it all comes full circle at some point or another.
Well, I have a good friend who used to run partnerships for the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron James played for them, and then
That's a
still ran
good time to be
partnerships
there.
for the Cleveland Cavaliers when he left the second time. And talking to this dude, I mean, everybody wants to do a deal when LeBron's involved, especially when you're winning a champion,
Sure,
all these things, right? Like,
sure.
not all value is financial. There's a lot of things that are a little bit of those softer metrics, especially if you've got a premier player or, the Dallas Cowboys, obviously, are the highest valued franchise in the history of sports, things of that nature, because of all these things that they do in addition to being a football team, right?
Right.
But yeah, like, I mean, my buddy, he went from living the good life of, the phone wouldn't stop ringing to he's making some cold calls
Yep.
because all of a sudden now I have to do these things. And the other part of it too is when you have data, you can make decisions, right? And you and I have talked about this before. You can't make decisions based on data you don't have. And so whether it's the good times or the bad times, worst case scenario is, let's say somebody gets a new CMO, a partner of yours, and they're like, hey, new leadership, really digging deep into our numbers. We're reevaluating our partnerships, XYZ. He's looking for, or she's looking for this, that, and the other. If you have those numbers at your disposal, you can tell that story. You're looking great, right? Oh, no
Yep.
problem. Let me get right back to you this afternoon, XYZ, because I work with Trajektory, potentially. Um, or you look a little bit foolish with like, oh, you need that? And then you're scrambling in the background. Well, I don't have those numbers, but this, that, and the other. And if some of the other partners do have those, now you're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges, and you're saying, where do we want our dollars going as we're reevaluating our partnership process, right?
Yeah, and you're actually tiptoeing around something else that I think is endemic not only within just sports, but it's really in any industry generally, right? I don't mean to oversimplify the world in which we live today, but generally speaking, you have a lot of groups at any organization, even outside of sports, where you have really crazy data-driven people, right?
Yep.
And you have maybe non-data driven people. And
I'm the
that's okay.
latter.
There's nothing wrong with either. Okay, and I'm the data nerd that works in an office with no windows all day, and that's why I'm a little crazy.
Yeah, I got to go
But
skateboarding now and then. Yeah.
yeah, you have a much cooler background than I do, by the way. Anyway,
Thanks.
we'll have to get into that at the end. Um, but effectively, what's really difficult and what organizations so often struggle with, which is you have data people who really understand the data, but they might not be, perhaps not all the time, but like perhaps they're not as good as how do you spin and tell a story, right? And then you have the other end of it, which
Yes.
is like, I can sell a ketchup popsicle, right? To quote an old movie favorite of mine.
Right.
But they might not understand how to use the data. And both things can be very intimidating and very, very frustrating for both of these groups. So you can have data people who like, this is what it says, and this is exactly what we should do, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then you have the people on the storytelling saying, like, I don't know, like, data is intimidating. Like, I don't know how to use it correctly. And so bridging the gap between these two groups is a really specialized skill, which takes a lot of time, a lot of experience, But being able to successfully do that is usually like data reporting, strategy, storytelling, nirvana, if you can ever reach it. And, shameless plug, that's a lot of what we've tried to do with our background, right? Is because like I was one of the few people that was able to figure out how do you bridge that gap and how do I sort of sit on both sides of this area. And but really trying to create a tool with that in mind, right?
Right.
So it's like how do we empower non-data driven people to be able to use data to make them feel empowered that they can knowledgeably and transparently talk about these things. And so, just again, given everything that you've said, it's like, well, I don't know if I want to use the data if I'm the sales guy. Well, a lot of that just comes down to the fact that like these individuals have never felt empowered or knowledgeable enough to be able to accurately do that, and that can be on them, or it just might be on the fact that the easy and simplified data to use just hasn't been available. So there's a lot of different rabbit holes that this goes down, but it's something that's not just in sports, it's in industries at large, across the globe. Excuse me, across the globe. So
Right. Yeah, no, I think like if you're trying to make my eyes bleed, you would say something like, John, dive into the data to pull insights for the client. And I grab the tissues at that moment. It's not going to be pretty. But one thing that also, to your point, you guys have focused on with your platform is it is both sides of the coin. Is at a glance, I can make sense of these things that I can very quickly send to my partner and say, look, we did X, Y, Z, this, that, and the other. But also for your fellow data nerds, the ability to go as deep into that data as necessary when that deep dive is appropriate and needed.
totally. And I think the 20-second follow up on that is it really just comes down to the fact that we were an organization that was really built by individuals that had sat on both sides of it, right? So like I was the data
Right.
guy who understood like what I needed as information, and then our brilliant COO Sharon Fish, right? She was a massive
Yep.
storyteller, strategy person who'd worked on the agency and team side, so she understood how to create stories and like what she wanted to look at. That was like a pretty picture on how to tell a good story. So really trying to triangulate these two different sides of the house on building a platform, I think has paid really big dividends for us. So it's been exciting.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of, the best way to understand your client is essentially hire your client or have someone who's sat in that actual seat rather than just guessing, hey, we're technologists, we can get all this data and so now it's available, but it's like, but have you done that job to where you've been in that seat where you had to report back to the partner or the client is asking you for these things and you're scrambling. And one of the things I wanted to touch on as well is the time saving aspect. For me, if I'm a partnership person, I want to spend as much as my time on the phone, sending those email outs, running the demos, in person, taking people to dinner, like building these relationships. I want to be selling as much as possible, right? And what I'm not doing when I'm diving deep into data, other than wiping the blood from my eyes and wishing I had a different job, is I'm not making money, right? I'm not out there selling. I'm not doing what I'm
Yeah.
passionate about, what I'm great at. And so I think the time saving aspect is just as valuable as even the ability to acquire that data.
I am like PTSD right now in terms of like the amount of time that it takes to pull these reports. But like you're hitting the nail on the head, right? Where most people, right, are not hired to pull data and to fix Excel.
Right.
They're hired to drive revenue for their organization. And that can be on the team side, the agency side, the brand side, right? Like your goal is to support the organization. Like you shouldn't be spending, and what we found at MSE at Monumental was like, this is not a made up number, 1,200 plus hours a year spent on just pulling data and pulling reports and sending it back to clients. And that sounds like a big number, but like what you don't think about is the number of people involved in the process. If someone says, "Hey, I need the Geico data," and then that phone call comes to me, and it's like, okay, then I got to call the email person, the social person. I got to do my own back of the envelope math. I send it back up the chain. It comes back because the data is wrong. Something's in error, and so there's just so much inefficiency that exists within just even getting to the data, much less even getting it back to the partner, right? And so just the amount of time that it takes, it's a massive, massive time suck. And to your point, like People should be driving revenue, building relationships, doing other things with their time. So yeah, that's a big piece of what we've also tried to solve. And man, even with an hour-ish podcast together, like we won't even scratch the surface of like of what we've built and how we're trying to help. But yeah, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, and one more aspect before we get a little deeper into, building the company,
Yeah.
that whole fun story is not only are you having to reach out to multiple partners because you work with multiple different reporting companies, analytics companies, but also they have different methodologies, which are weighed differently. And so that was something when we first met and we're going over what you're doing and this, that, and the other. That was
And
something
I just
that
talked to you for an hour in a row, and you just listened to me and nodded your head. Yeah, I remember.
exactly. Yeah, I was taking notes. But that was something that really hit me was, wait a minute. Yeah, I make all these phone calls. I finally get all the reports from multiple different sources, and now they're not weighted the same. So is my story even accurate?
It sounds silly when you say it because it is a really silly process that organizations still continually go through. But yeah, like, look, I mean, even with my experience at Monumental, like we were a resource-rich organization. Like we had the money to, not every organization is, right? But like we had the resources to spend on social tools and on television tools and all sorts of reports and fancy data. But at the end of the year, it was still a convoluted process, right? Like
Right.
Geico or whomever would come back and be like, Alex, Sharon, tell me how you came up with this methodology. And you'd say, yeah, no problem. So we got this one social vendor who does it this way. We have a television vendor that does it a totally different way. And God bless their heart on our business intelligence team. They did their own back of the envelope math, and it's a
Right.
totally different methodology. And it's like, well, I don't understand. Like, why is the methodology different? Like, the values should be different, but why is the underlying methodology different? And so, even when you have all these resources at your disposal, having all these inconsistent methodologies across the board still leads to really difficult conversations with partners because they don't get it. Well, why is it different? And the reality is it shouldn't be. So, yeah, it's as I said, it's inefficient and it's I like what I said a moment ago. It's like it's a silly way to do things, and I think the industry at large is finally in a position I think where they're realizing that the tools out there are just they're not cutting it. And the vendors that are known as like the key marquee vendors in social logo detection and television logo detection, the smarter teams, the smarter agencies are really starting to realize that like, nah, it's all hobo craziness. So
Right.
time to wake up and be a little bit more holistic.
Well, it sounds like we're finally in a place where we don't have to put up with those things now that a solution like this is here.
Yeah, there's
Um,
options.
I'm really interested to hear about your life story here, your career story of
Oh man.
being involved with building this company. So so you're a Monumental. Did you have other stops between Monumental and Trajectory, or was it a direct step into that process?
Yeah, I spent a wonderful 5 years at Monumental. A lot of good friends there, had great mentors, great bosses, but eventually I left. I came back and actually worked on the brand side. So I worked for a loyalty e-commerce platform for about 3.5 years, and all of a sudden I'm spending tens of millions of dollars on sponsorship data
Yeah.
instead of being the one that is trying to figure it all out. And so I came to the realization on the other side of the marketplace of like, man, you can be spending millions of dollars and get no data in return. And so like that was kind of, I think, a trigger moment for me to realize like, wow, like on the team side, I know how bad it was and a lot
Hmm.
of the BS that goes on behind the scenes to try to figure out numbers.
Yeah.
And on the brand side, I'm left holding the bag. I, wrote a seven-figure, check to somebody, and I never got any data in return. So it's like that was really, I think, the moment where I realized, wow, this is really bad, and it's just systemically broken. And yeah, I mentioned before our COO and co-founder Sharon Fish. She went to go work on the agency side, and we had kept in contact and actually worked together again at the loyalty e-commerce platform. And as we got to talking, like wasn't any better on the agency side either. So a lot
Hmm.
of great people, a lot of great human beings, but the data consistency and methodology across all these different parts of the industry, it's difficult, right? And so we said, hey, it's got to be a better way to do it.
So a lot of people complain about things. Not everybody takes the actions to fix it. And also the many actions to come up with an idea, build a team,
Yeah.
especially something as complicated as this. Um, what was that catalyst? What was the thing where you said, you know what, I can't take it anymore, Sharon? Let's get together. Let's quit our day jobs. Let's start eating top ramen again, and let's start this company.
Yeah, and then it would be unfair of me if I also didn't mention our other co-founder, Matt, who essentially is the brilliant technologist behind all of this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the catalyst for us was it was really like kind of right place, right time, and that's a cliche thing to say, but I had a successful run at Monumental, had done very well at the loyalty commerce organization. We built a very large, successful, really great team there. And I was looking for like what the next adventure was and what the next challenge was going to be. And I had a couple of different options on the table actually. One of which was start my own company or go work for a really great agency or go work for another great company.
Yeah.
And I really, for me personally, I can't speak for Sharon and for Matt, but for me personally, I had really I'd grown up with a parent, my mother, who actually had started her own company back in
Mm,
the 70s, a technology company. And I'd always really admired her for doing that. And I said, if I was ever going to start my own company, now was the time to do it. And so I said, the heck with it. At that time, I wasn't yet married. I got married last October, though.
congratulations.
Didn't have kids, still don't have kids. And I said, if there's ever time to go build a company, now is the time to do it. And so, and this was just something that, Sharon and I had really talked quite a bit about that was a real problem. And so we thought that we really had an idea that had legs, and the timing was right. But I think as to what you alluded to is those two are really important things. But even though the timing is right and you decide to do something, it is a really big mountain to climb to build a
Yeah.
company. And I thought I had an idea of how difficult it was going to be, and oh my God, off, exponentially on how difficult and how much time. But it's a hell of a thing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, I love how you kind of alluded to your the three-headed monster, I would call it. We're not calling Sharon a monster. You and Matt, definitely monsters.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, you got the scouting report.
yeah, so Matt is this brilliant technologist. Sharon is this storyteller person. You self-identify as a data nerd who has
Yep.
been on both the agency and the brand sides. Share a little bit about some advice for our audience of building that founding team. Sounds like you've done it very complimentary. Sounds like there's a little overlap. What are some of the other things to look for when building a core team?
I will start by saying I got incredibly lucky. Just the fact that I had known Sharon for as long as I had, we'd worked at multiple different places together, so we understood one another, and we had that time to build a relationship organically, which then I think turned into a heck of a lot of respect for one another. So I was very fortunate that I just had like the right person out of the gate that I knew really, really well in Sharon. But when we knew that we needed to go find a brilliant technologist, which we did, that was a really, really, really difficult thing to do. One, I
Mm,
had never hired anybody that was on the tech side before, but two, it's a big investment on time, on energy, and like if you get that wrong and you go with the wrong technology
right.
stack, like it'll set you back years.
Wow.
So I think what we really ended up looking for was one, someone who is a little quirky, because I'm a bit of a quirky guy, and Sharon, while she seems like she's the cool, hair blowing in the wind strategist, she's a dork as well. So, that was going for us. So we wanted to find somebody who meshed with our personality really well. I
Hmm.
think that was a really big fit. Certainly the skill set goes without saying that you need that as well. And so we ended up finding Matt. It took us over half a year to find the right person.
Hmm.
Tons and tons and tons of interviews, but it has certainly paid dividends. And I think, the advice that I try to give anybody when they're hiring is I generally like to find somebody who has a sense of curiosity about them, right? Someone who
Hmm.
is curious is always going to push themselves to go find more, to go understand how to solve a problem. That is certainly easier said than done, but I'm a really, really big culture guy.
Yeah.
I would rather hire good human beings and good culture, and I think the rest takes care of itself. And it sounds really easy what I've just walked through, but I have to say I just was so lucky to meet Matt, and was just very very lucky previously in my career to have met Sharon.
Yeah, I love that point on culture. I was extremely fortunate that about 15 years ago, after I broke my ankle at the end of a skateboarding tour, I ended up in my very first office job in Washington, D.C. And one of the best jobs I've ever had, and I've had a bunch of them, was in a tax firm called Beers and Cutler. And so people might not guess that my one of my favorite job experiences at a tax firm, but it had not much to do with the tasks I was doing. In fact, many of them were very dull and boring, and I wasn't passionate about them. But I remember the last day I was at that tax firm, I was there a little over 2 years, and the managing partner, Ed Ofterdinger, we just called him Ed, don't know
It's a
why.
great name.
Yeah, he's also been a guest on this podcast. He's just a tremendous person. But he came down to my desk and he said, "John, I hear that you're leaving us, and thank you so much for your time here. What are you doing next? Blah blah blah." So we talked for a little bit, and I said, "Ed, I've got one final question for you. When my name is on the building, what do I need to know?" And he said, "It's all about the people." He said, "Who you work with is more important than even what you do." And we spend more time with our work colleagues than even our families. And so if that is not enjoyable on a human interaction basis beyond just the work you're doing, you're wasting your life. And that has always stuck with me. And it sounds like that's something that's stuck with you and has really helped you in your pursuit of not just smart people, experienced people, but the right people who you're going to be in the trenches with every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up really well. And it's, do right by people at the end of the day. And it's easier said than done, at times to build good culture. And it's not something that you ever really do, right? You don't ever sort of step back and say, "Hey, I built the perfect team. Like, we're done." Like, there are always
Right.
problems. There are always things that can be improved. But I mean, to your point, it's like, I think if you generally hire good human beings, and how do you define a good human being? It's not a rabbit hole we're going to go down
Sure.
today. But I think it's you find a good human being, and usually the rest takes care of itself. And so, yeah, to your point, life is short. Work with people that you like to be around ultimately.
Yeah, I'm curious if you were to give yourself. So, first of all, when was Trajectory founded? How long ago?
We founded, well, if you look at all of our websites and materials, it was January of 2020, but we had this idea, and we were working on a couple things, moonlighting, certainly late into 2019, but
Hmm.
officially beginning of 2020.
Okay, so the idea when you really started working on it about 3 years ago. If
Yeah.
you were to go back to the Alex Kerr of late
Oh,
2019 and give me two or three pieces of advice that you would tell yourself, uh, your past self.
wow, to get sentimental for a moment, I would give myself the advice of, this is going to be a really exciting time in your life, and it's going to require a lot of you,
Mm,
both mentally as well as a time constraint. But make sure that you are taking care of the most important relationships in your life outside of
mm,
that, and make sure that you are spending the time with the right people, and making sure that they feel appreciated. And I think what that gets into is, like, it's really easy to throw yourself into 100 hours a week when you're building a company, and it's the most
right.
exciting thing I've ever done in my life, hands down, right? Like,
Yeah.
I will look back at this time fondly, but making sure that I'm very bad at turning off the laptop.
Mm,
And there are times that I should do that more often, right? And I think that's something that I've learned in time, and I'm trying to be better at now, and I'll always have things to get better at. But make sure you're still spending time with your loved ones, because those are the relationships that are going to get you through this whole thing, and those are the things that you
yeah.
can't let fall through the cracks. So yeah, that's a big one. By the way, everything's fine in my life, like nothing to complain about, but things that I could certainly be better at,
Sure.
in retrospect. I think the other thing, right? It's don't there's when you start something, right, it's like you can't sleep, and it's like, oh my god, I have all these ideas, I need to get them down on paper, and we need to go faster, we need to build this, we need to go 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 go. And there certainly is an aspect of that, right? Because you're always like looking over your shoulder. Oh, is somebody else going to build this? Is somebody else going to build this? There's going to be competition along the way, no matter what, right? You can't control that. But I think the other piece of advice I might give myself is like breathe for a moment. Like what you're building here is very fundamentally different. And while others will come along and try to compete head to head or indirectly, like you have a very special viewpoint on this, and it's going to be differentiated no matter what. So spend less time panicking and just focus on the things that are really, really important and making that incremental progress along the way. So just trying to save myself some stress, where you always think someone's breathing down your neck,
Right.
and there is, but like at the same time, it's like you can't control that. Just focus on you and focus on making the best product that you can.
Yeah, that's very well said. So part of this journey, I know you guys have raised some capital, and so that is a journey that a lot of this audience is going through or has gone through, planning to go through in the near future. A lot of entrepreneurs listening to the podcast. What are first of all, had you raised capital before, or was this your first time doing it?
It's my first time, and man, is it a wild journey.
What a learning experience! Why don't you help us learn from your experience so it's a little easier for ours?
Okay, you have to keep me honest here and tell me when to pipe it
I
and
will.
turn on, but I'll try to be succinct. So, if you're trying to raise money,
That's enough.
like there's a lot of
Just kidding.
different, yeah,
Keep
yeah,
going.
done. Okay, bye. There's a ton of different spots that you can do it from, right? Like you have family and friends, right? Like if you're happen to be wealthy and you have your own cash and you can bootstrap, great, right? Oftentimes, you go through family and friends to raise additional funds. That can only last so long, right? So you have to start to make decisions. Do you take things like a loan out? Do you try to go work for an incubator or go work for under an incubator or an accelerator? Do you take venture capital money? People are very, scared about that. Do you do angel investing? So you have different options,
Hmm.
right? But depending on like what you end up wanting to do and how you want to scale, different options make sense. For us personally, I won't go down all the avenues as to when not to do it, but for us, it made sense to go through a venture capital round. And I had never gone through a traditional VC. As eye-opening, right? And no matter how great your product is, you've got literally hundreds of people saying that your baby's ugly, right? And it's like you got to have a
Right.
thick skin. And like I'm a wear my emotions on the side of my sleeve kind of guy. So you have to have a thick skin, right? Like not everyone's going to get it, not everyone's going to buy in, but it is a marathon. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of focus to really do it correctly. Um, and I would just, the advice I would give to anybody that's doing it is you really have to approach it as a marathon, not a sprint. And you also need to be prepared. I think the biggest mistake that I've seen, again, in my limited experience, is people have an idea and they just go immediately to VCs. Here's my idea, here's my idea,
Hmm.
here's my idea. But they haven't really thought about how do you package yourselves? How do you deliver your story? Like we're a data storytelling company
Right.
for crying out loud. We should be able to do that well. So we took a lot of time up front to build the correct materials and decks, hone in our pitch. We practice, practice, practice. We went in front of what we called friendlies, right? Not the real VCs that we knew weren't a fit for us,
Hmm.
but that would give us feedback as to what we did well and what we didn't do well. And
Smart.
so by the time we actually got to our first real meeting, we felt like we were already in a rhythm and we had a really strong pitch and it was succinct and it was efficient. And that still took us, months and months and months and months. And at the time, what was a really hot market for getting funding. So it still was just an absolute bear to climb. Um, but the last piece of advice I'll just say, and I'll pause here for a moment, is if you've decided to raise venture capital, you are like 1% of 1% of the population that has decided to do that,
Hmm.
right? Like you are a very, very, very small part of the population that is like tormenting yourself by going through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Take a step back and enjoy it, right? And I know that
Hmm.
kind of sounds counterintuitive because it's really stressful, but it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity that people will ever do that. And don't lose sight of the journey along the way, right? And
Yeah.
so it's a fun thing to go through if you can try to remove yourself from the situation and be like, man, this is wild. I'm building a company. I'm trying to raise money from venture capital. It's me against the world. Like it's a cool time to be in. Although it's also very stressful.
That is really cool, and I think that's great advice. One question is, and maybe this is case by case, so answer this however is appropriate, but is there a way to evaluate when you're ready to get investment. And the reason I asked that, I heard someone saying one time, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk said, so many people are now immediately, I've got an idea, I'm going to get funding. And in the history of the world, like up until very recently, you could not just go get somebody else's money to do your thing. It was, no, I have to build something that makes this amount of money. Most of it's going back into the business so I can grow it. And I'm doing it all on my own. Now it's very fortunate that we do have ways to raise capital to kind of get that instant accelerator, if you will. What are some of the ways to determine, do I just think I need capital or do I actually need capital?
I'm gonna take a small left turn and come back to that question because it sparked another thought which I think is really important,
Mm-hmm.
especially for anybody that's trying to raise money. If you Google raising money or VC capital, all you ever see is, oh, this company raised money, this company raised money, this company raised money. So it feels like everybody's getting money. That's not the
Right.
case. It's like 1 out of every 20 companies that want to raise money will actually ever be able to do it. It's actually, sorry, it's less than that. It's like, it's like 0.5%,
Wow.
right, will actually ever end up being able to, it's like 1 out of 200, not 1 out of every 20. So it's really hard to do. But the other misnomer is that, like, I used to go to these conferences and it was like, I have an idea and I pitched it to a VC and I just got my first check for $1.5 million. And you're like, wow, all they have is an idea and they got $1.5 million. And it kind of feels like all these people are just getting hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on, like, I just created a bag of air and I haven't even created my,
Pet
MVP
rock.
yet.
That's my idea. Yeah.
Right. It does. Oh, dude, pet rock. I'll sign me up all day long. But that's just not the case. This
Right.
whole idea that people are getting startup funding pre-revenue, like, does it happen? Yes, technically it does, but like those are usually from people that have built 5 previous successful companies and have
Yeah.
made billions and billions of dollars. So VCs and banks are willing to throw a lot of money their way just for an idea. But for the most part, like, it's companies that you need to have some traction. You need to have real traction and some real revenue until you're sort of at a spot where you have a better degree of success to raise money. You have a
Right.
better shot at raising money if you have real traction and actual money coming through the door. It doesn't have to be a ton, but at least you have to show that that's happening. So that's one big piece when you know that perhaps you're ready to go at least to the venture capital side of the world. And I think, it's the cliche answer to answer the question more head on. Start raising money before you run out of money. And if you're going to run out of money in 6 months, you probably should have been raising 6 months prior, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, like, try to generally, budget 6 to 12 months of runway at least, that you don't think you're going to need, for your capital raise. So I think it probably takes anywhere 6 to 12 months to get through your first raise, generally speaking.
Right.
So you probably want 12 to 18 months worth of runway if you're going to do it. Now, there's other things you can do. You can do short-term borrowing and write safe notes and try to get bridge loans for a couple 100,000 here or there, but most people don't start early enough. So
Yeah. Good feedback.
traction and start as early as you can.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that myself. So that's good feedback. And also, better to start early, take your time, learn things versus like, oh crap, I need money in 2 months or I'm done. And then you end up being desperate. You take a bad situation or you
Yeah.
just go out of business, not being able to find a solution.
And how do you find the time to stop and pause and do all that when you're trying to build a company and you're not
Right.
taking enough time? And so it's just like it is, and that's what I mean by, like, it is so hard. It's not that it can't be done. It's just you don't have enough hours in the day to go build a company, to take back, to be strategic. Like, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
really, really hard, and you have to have a good support network, to really get you through it, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious to dive in some of the learnings that you've had after going through all these friendly VCs and then the more serious pitches. I've had the
Friendly VC, an oxymoron.
I've had the opportunity to see a number of pitches. I'm involved with Stadia Ventures, and so they bring these big cohorts together. There's 100 judges in the room. They bring all these entrepreneurs in front of us. They pitch, and they leave the room, and then we talk about who we think Stadia should invest in and why, and then they make the final decision. Also, at the ESCA conference that you were at, we had a pitch competition where we have people go through this class. They learn how to pitch effectively, and we get to see people do it on stage. It's a lot of fun. What are some of the things that somebody who's developing their pitch that you would advise them, make sure that you hit on these things, or the investors are thinking from this perspective, so put that hat on to position things in a certain way?
Yeah, a couple things. So first and foremost, you'll probably hear this from a lot of people, and 99.9% of the people still get this totally wrong. Your pitch deck can almost not be short enough or fast enough. Like your goal should be to get through 12 slides in 10 minutes, keep it tight and be done, because the art of a traditional VC meeting, not necessarily a pitch and a 5-minute pitch, is you want there to be back and forth, and you want there to be questions, and you want to dive deeper into things. Most people spend 90% of the time just pitching slide after slide after slide. A VC will love you if you can do your entire pitch in like 10 minutes or less, saving 20 minutes for like Q&A and back and forth and getting to know each other. VCs, especially at the early round, are taking a bet on you as a founder, not necessarily your organization, right? So the opportunity for them to get to know you as a person, what makes you tick, how you think on your feet, is almost just as important, if not more important, than the pitch deck itself. That being said, keep the deck short, keep it tight. I think usually what you have to have in there is like, what is the problem that you're solving, right? What is the real challenge that's out there? What is the solution to it, i.e. you or your product or your organization? And then how big is the opportunity and how big is the market, right? You know, most people that are trying to invest in small companies and startups, they're not looking to hit a single and, you know, only make, you know, a couple $1,000 of return, right? Like, they're looking for home runs in companies that can be really successful and really, really big. So you have to have the right market size. You know, if I can only sell, you know, 5 of these canisters and it's the best canister ever, but I can only sell 5 of them for $10 a pop, it's probably not a big enough market for it, right? But if I can sell, you know, 100 million of them, well, maybe the market's big enough. So understanding the market size.
What I would add to that is I would suggest, rather than the cup you have, is Ice Shaker, sponsor of the DLC Drop podcast, which, you know, if you have the cup that Alex has, you should definitely throw that away and go to iceshaker.com/DLC drop. That's probably maybe the biggest takeaway from this podcast. Would you agree?
But will it keep my drink hot or cold?
Not only will it keep it hot, it will keep it cold. And I'm glad you asked, Alex. It can also be customized with your logo with a turnaround time in less than a week.
Last question, John. What if I don't want it in black?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Alex. We have it in many colors. XYZ. Brrr. Yeah.
Love it. It's perfect.
Amazing. How important is it in this pitch to discuss your competitors?
Yeah, it's really important. Thanks for bringing that up. So there's a number of different things you want in a pitch deck. You can Google it, get a good idea. Heck, reach out to me and I can give you my secret sauce at some point. But you absolutely want to talk about the competition, right? And a lot of, I think, founders think like, oh, we have no competition. BS. You got some competition somewhere. It might not be direct. It might not be the exact thing, but there's something else playing within that space, right? 99.99999% of the time, there's some sort of competitor that's out there. So you absolutely talk about them, but you also need to understand, like, why are you different? Why do you have better economies of scale? Why can you win? Why can you build the product cheaper than they can, right? So talking about competitors, like what's out there, like, and who you're up against, one, shows that the founder knows what the heck they're talking about, right? I understand this market really, really well, and I know who's players in the space. Because if you skip over that, you look like an idiot, and you look like you don't know the space, and you lose all of your credibility in terms of who your investors are. But it's certainly important to address that for sure.
Yeah, one thing a friend of mine who was raising capital gave me some advice on one time, really had me think about approaching investors in a very different way. A lot of people will look at, oh, I'm going out and I'm asking for favors, and I almost feel bad that I'm asking people for money. And my friend helped me figure out or see that, no, you're not asking a favor. You are giving someone an opportunity to take part in this thing that they would not have without you. So do not be intimidated. Do not be apologetic. Do not be timid going to people to share this thing that you're so passionate about, that you have built an organization, a team, and you live and breathe every day. Like, you are their opportunity. Would you echo that?
I echo that, and I'll take it a step further by saying, actually, I'll flip it around. If you were a VC and I was pitching you and I was kind of like, yeah, if you want to invest, like, that's fine. You don't have to, but like, if you want to invest, that's great. What kind of confidence am I projecting as a founder? Right. And so it's like, you have got to like burn the ships, and like, you are headed towards building a successful company. Right. And so you effectively need to be able to, for lack of a better term, like, you need to be a little arrogant about what you've built. Right. Like, know your self-worth, and like, know that you've built something that's like really, really special. And that comes off like when you talk to somebody, right, in terms of the confidence. And so not only should you not feel bad for it, like, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, this is an opportunity for them. And if you really believe that, that'll naturally come through.
Absolutely. No one's going to be more excited about your idea than you are.
Or understand it better. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot in this episode, Alex. We've gone through what is Trajektory. We've talked about your entrepreneurial journey, building the team, raising capital. If there's anything more that you wanted somebody to take away from this episode, what would that one thing be?
I think the biggest thing that I would give, and less necessarily about trajectory, more perhaps about like starting a company. Really, it's what we talked about earlier, right? Like, work with good people. Like, you never know what's going to go on with your career, right? Like, whether or not you build a company that ends up being a Fortune 500, or whether or not you build a company that fizzles out and doesn't work. It's the people that you work with that I think really make or break a lot of the experiences, right? And so I would just say for anybody, whether or not they're looking for a job, or at their current job, or building a company, or building a team internally at a larger organization, like, hire good human beings, in my opinion. Certainly there has to be a skill set associated with it, but working with good people, I think, goes a long way, and life is short. So appreciate those around you that you love, and live a happy life. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So leave it on an upbeat piece.
Great advice. How can the audience get a hold of you and Trajektory in the ways that you would like them to?
Yeah, feel free. You can reach out to me directly. This is going to be like, when I look back on this in 10 years, I can't believe I gave out my email. I hope that's what happens one day, but no.
Can you give us the social security number associated?
Yeah, a credit card number. It's a Visa. No, so alex@trajektory.com. Trajektory spelled with a K, so TRAJEKTORY.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Happy to talk shop. Talk about starting a business. I like being a sounding board. And actually, that's the other thing I'll end on in terms of a piece of advice is always pay it forward. So make time. A lot of people have helped you along the way, likely in your respective journeys. Always make the time to help people and talk to people and be a sounding board. So I'm a big fan of that as well.
Well said. Well, Alex Kerr, CEO of Trajektory, thank you for joining me. I've learned a lot. I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you for dropping some knowledge to our audience today on the DLC Drop podcast.
Hey, thanks for the time and the opportunity. Appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.